What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo team, talking some college football DFS ahead of conference championship week. We are going to talk Friday today, and I'm recording this on Thursday night ahead of schedule because there's some construction at my apartment during the day. So to avoid that, we are recording at night. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. Without further ado, let's bring you behind the glass, show you some player usage data. We have this slate write-ups, ownership projections, regular projections, everything you need to dominate DFS. But getting into these matchups, there's one game on Friday night, a two-game slate that stands out above the others. It is Western Kentucky UTSA for Conference USA, the championship. Western Kentucky is a 2.5-point favorite, moving to 3 in some spots, a 72-point total overall. So that is why there's a lot more intrigue with this game. Western Kentucky, extremely pass-heavy, 67% pass. This team runs 77 plays per game. And on the other side, UTSA very fast as well, nearly 74 plays per game, far more balanced, about a 45% pass rate for them. And this game has explosive potential. We saw this score 99 total points in the first matchup. UTSA gets the win, but Western Kentucky actually finishes with over 100 more yards. And we look back to that game, Bailey Zappi threw for over 500 yards passing. He's a player that averages 412 passing yards per game. Not mobile, but it doesn't really matter when you're throwing the ball 49 times per game and averaging over 400 yards. Zappi's been over 300 yards, obviously, in most of his contests this year. And similar to Mississippi State, the high pass rate just allows him to backdoor his way into a lot of 300-yard bonuses. And then this also matches up against the UTSA defense, weaker against the pass. So Zappi is an excellent play at an expensive price. He should be your cash game staples and very easy to stack too. Speaking of the pass game, Jareth Stearns averaging nearly 130 receiving yards per game, 13 targets per game. He's seen at least 10 in 3 of the last 4. Not enough good things to say about Stearns. He is 7,300, and that is not expensive enough. The same goes for Mitchell Tinsley, who on the year is averaging 7.8 targets, but has taken on a larger role down the stretch where he averages 10.8 targets per game in their last 4, over 10 targets in each of their last 3 contests. 93.9 yards per game. So if you cannot afford Stearns or you just want to be contrarian, Tinsley is a solid consolation prize. The same goes for Malachi Corley and Daewood Davis. Daewood Davis has actually been a lot more involved of late. He's seen at least 6 targets in each of the last 3 games. And he's the guy that averages 5.1 on the year. Malachi Corley averages 7.8 targets per game on the year. But Daewood Davis has actually been a little more of a deep threat and a little more efficient. Despite Malachi Corley out targeting Davis 93 to 61. Davis actually has more yardage, 663 to 643. Davis at 4,400 is an excellent price adjusted play in this offense and makes sense as a punt option and a cheap attachment to Zappi. In the backfield, it is a 3-way committee between Noah Whittington, Adam Cofield, and Kyle Robichaud. We've even seen Jakari Moses involved in the last 2 games, and these have both been blowout victories. And Jakari Moses actually announced that he was going into the transfer portal. But interestingly, he did that before last week's game, and then he played in the game. So I don't know if we see Moses or not. In competitive games, he's not much of a focal point in the offense anyway. And we've seen Whittington play a larger role. It's tough to decipher what is game script because they've been such heavy favorites and they've been winning by so much in their recent contests, and what the timeshare would look like in a competitive game. So there's a lot of volatility here. Whittington's really cheap if you're looking for just a cheap access point to the Western Kentucky offense. But interestingly, they don't throw to their running backs a ton. Cofield leads the team in targets among this group with 19. On the UTSA side, obviously much intrigue here. Implied for nearly 35 points, even as underdogs. Frank Harris got banged up in their most recent game, but he is going to play. He's extremely mobile and he's very cheap. 484 yards for Frank Harris. He averages nearly 225 as a passer. And ultimately, Western Kentucky plays solid football overall. But Frank Harris, he's been able to take advantage of this matchup. And we've seen a lot of players do this against Western Kentucky in the past. The way Western Kentucky plays, they just pace you up and they increase your pass rate generally when they're leading. Frank Harris threw for 349 yards and 6 scores in their previous matchup. It was actually the only time he's eclipsed 3 touchdowns all year. And he also rushed for 51 yards on 9 carries. There is a little bit of worry here that Harris might be banged up, but ultimately he's cheap enough in this game environment where he's almost a no-brainer playing cash formats. Cheap access point to a great game. Sincere McCormick, also a very strong play at 6,200. He's a guy, when he's in competitive spots, he's almost a lock to get 20 touches, and he's seen that in 3 of the last 4 games, excluding the most recent contest where UTSA actually lost to North Texas. But again, Frank Harris got hurt in the contest, and they took their foot off the gas. So Sincere McCormick averaging 106 rush yards per game. He was at 120 last time they played Western Kentucky, easily over 20 touches. McCormick is a very safe play. In the pass game, you also have cheap options to stack with Frank Harris. Zachary Franklin is the target leader. He has 96 on the year. That is ahead of Joshua Cephas at 81 and DeCorian Clark at 63. Those are far and away your top 3 most targeted players, and Sincere McCormick is actually 4th with 20. But the efficiency sides with Franklin, he averages 8.8 targets per game in their last 4 contests. And from there, DeCorian Clark has actually played a larger role than Cephas in the 4 most recent games. He's averaging 6.5 targets to Cephas's 5.8. And this is very close, and Cephas does have a target edge on the season. But if you're saving $600 in salary, that can go a decent ways on this slate, maybe help you get up to Stearns. So DeCorian Clark is another very efficient play at 4,200, good stacking option with Frank Harris. Game number 2, the Pac-12 championship, a rematch from 2 weeks ago, Oregon taking on Utah. It was a complete rout in the first game. Utah smashed Oregon. But this week it's a 3-point spread. Obviously, that was played in Utah, and this is now being played at a neutral location in Vegas. It has a 59-point total, giving some intrigue, but Utah, even as the favorite, they're not even implied as much as UTSA as the underdog in the former matchup. So there are options in this game, but it's a little more difficult to get to. Both teams are slower and run heavier. We're talking sub 44% pass rate for both. Both teams running about 69.5 plays per game. On the Oregon side, they're a difficult team to play when they're down in games. Anthony Brown is a game manager, but he benefits from a very strong ability on the ground, 642 rush yards for him, and he doesn't take a lot of sacks. So Anthony Brown is somebody who has a good floor, but the ceiling is always questionable because he doesn't have that upside as a passer. Just 209 passing yards per game on 27.5 attempts. You perhaps see a ceiling here, but Utah plays strong defense across the board, run and pass, and you're dealing with a depleted pass-catching core. They lost Johnny Johnson to injury, Jalen Redd to injury, and Micah Pittman transferred. So you're looking at Devon Williams and Chris Hudson as the top 2 receivers. And while for DFS that narrows the target pool enough where you could target like a Chris Hudson who has games of 8 and 10 targets in back-to-back weeks, or Williams with 10 and 6 targets in back-to-back weeks, it's not great for the offensive efficiency, as good as it is for DFS. So those guys are GPP plays ultimately because you have cheap options in Clark and UTSA and the cheaper options for Western Kentucky, but they may see more targets. Outside of that, they run a lot of 12 personnel. Troy Franklin is the wide receiver 3 in a rotation. Tough to get to with Hudson at 4,300 and some of the other value options, but Franklin at 4K, he's just a bit too expensive. Travis Dye, he only saw 6 carries in the previous matchup. Again, they just got routed so quickly that they took Dye out of the game, but he has a very strong workload outside of that. He's a guy that has at least 20 touches in 3 of the last 4 games, and he has a solid pass-catching role. Second on the team in targets, 45, averaging 4.5 targets per game over their last 4. Dye is the second best running back play in a vacuum on the slate because of the workload. It's consistent across the board in the pass game and the run game, and it comes in a little better than the Utah guys, and we'll talk about them in a second. But even as underdogs, Dye is a strong play. Cameron Rising, he might just by default be the worst quarterback play on the slate due to pricing, and he's also in a game managerial role. But unlike Anthony Brown, he doesn't have as many rushing chops. He got there quite a bit early in the year on rushing efficiency, but he's been a guy that seldom reaches double-digit carries, and that's an issue. Fortunately, Rising doesn't take a lot of sacks, and he is efficient as a passer, but he does require close games to be coaxed into elevated passing attempts, averaging just 25 attempts per game, nearly 192 passing yards per game. That's not enough for most DFS contests, but if Oregon keeps it close and the game plays a little bit faster than we expect, Rising is a good GPP play. For stacking, it's gotten a little more difficult. They rotate receivers and rotate tight ends. Brant Kuthi and Dalton Kinsey, they operate a lot in 12 personnel, but Kuthi is the leader in terms of yardage on the team, and he only averages 43.5 per game, which is a bit concerning at his price, but Kuthi's the one. Covey plays a rotational role right now, but he's a slot receiver, a gadget guy. Even though he has 2 more targets than Kuthi, he is 100 less yards. And then you have Devon Vele, who interestingly dropped below 10% of the snaps last week in a non-competitive game against Colorado, but it is worth noting. And you saw Theo Howard and Solomon Enos play about 50% of the snaps apiece. So outside of Covey and the tight ends, it's very difficult to decipher Utah. And there's enough cheap receivers where I'm not sure you need to play Theo Howard, Solomon Enos, or Devon Vele outside of tournaments. In the run game, Tavian Thompson is healthy. He missed a game 3 weeks ago now. But when he's healthy, he's had over 20 carries in each of the last 2 games, been on at least 20 in the last 3 he's played. And he averages 88.7 rushing yards per game. The issue with Tavian Thompson is he just doesn't have like a locked-in pass game role. They actually prefer Micah Bernard as a pass catcher who leads the team with 26 targets. You look at Tavian Thomas, he only has 2 targets on the year. And it's not likely that Utah gets down in this game. They're 3-point favorites. But if it were to occur, you could see Tavian Thomas phased out of the game a little bit in favor of Micah Bernard or even like a TJ Pledger, who's had at least 10 carries himself in each of the last 3 games. There's just a little bit more of a timeshare with Thomas than there is with Sincere McCormick and Travis Dye, which is why he's a little bit riskier of a play, but still a fantastic play overall at 7,700. But that'll do it for our 2-game slate. Thank you guys for listening. Let me know in the comment section who your favorite plays are. Would love to hear it. Otherwise, we will be back for the main slate, but I am Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you again soon.